World Affairs Roundup, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. Today we'll be looking at Arab outreach. Barack Obama's interview on Dubai-based Al Arabiya TV this week met with rave reviews in the Arab and Muslim worlds. Can he parlay popularity into peace? No nukes for now. In response to President Obama's decision to revisit deployment of a controversial missile defense system in Central Europe, Russia announced it was abandoning plans to deploy nuclear-capable missiles in its Kaliningrad outpost near Poland. Is it a warming trend in the forecast for U.S.-Russian relations? Erstwhile allies. Congolese rebel leader Laurent Nkunda was arrested by his former sponsors in Rwanda as part of a deal that brought Rwandan troops into Congo with the Kinshasa government's blessing. Will the shifting alliances finally bring peace? Taking on the yuan. Barack Obama's newly minted Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, raised eyebrows by publicly accusing China of manipulating the value of its currency. Is the new administration signaling a tougher stance toward Beijing? To help us explore these issues and more, we're joined by John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents. Ann Hamilton, political scientist and coordinator of international studies at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service. And Louis Fortis, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Shepherd Express, Milwaukee's alternative weekly newspaper. He also served in the Wisconsin State Legislature and as a professor of economics at Smith College. Well, welcome to World Affairs Roundup. And Louis, I think I'm going to put you right to work here. So I'm wondering, I know you are keen observers of things political, and if as you look at President Obama giving this interview, first interview to an Arab cable television network, what do you see as its significance in terms of the various audiences? U.S. government, U.S. public, Muslim Arab governments, Muslim Arab public?
Well, if you look at what he's doing in many other areas, he's kind of trying to straighten out policies a little that went a little too far under President Bush. And I think Israel has been a wonderful ally of the United States. And what happened here is, I think Bush just, again, carried it to an extreme, and there was, I think the rest of the world felt that there was very little balance in the way the U.S. approached the Israeli-Palestinian question. And I think that President Obama has the confidence to understand that the Israelis understand that we are their ally. But it's the Arab street and the Arab, the moderate Arab countries, and actually even the more extreme Arab countries, that need to know that if we're going to be a broker for peace, and there is not going to be peace in that area unless we are behind it, that we have to show that we can be a little more balanced. And I think that's what he was doing right now. Because when he started with this, it was very symbolic. What he said was nothing extreme. It was very reasonable, but it was very symbolic. And I think that what that does is take a lot of the steam out of the extremist areas in the Arab world and say, hey, this guy, this was the first interview. This is important. Give this guy a chance. And I think that was fantastic.
And a lot of presidents, or Republican and Democrat, have chosen to really have relations with the governments and the heads of state in those governments, which are not known as being terribly democratic, even the more moderate ones. This was seen as more of a gamble, if you will, to go first to the publics, the Muslim Arab publics. Is that a choice that can be sustained? In other words, can the Obama administration really have a policy based on communicating to the Arab street, as Louis was saying, or are they going to have to come back and work with the governments?
Well, they'll have to come back and work with the governments, but I think he's playing it all angles of this. This is his strength, is appealing to the public, and he did it very well, and he used references to his childhood in Indonesia and his Muslim relatives, to things that he didn't highlight during the campaign here. It also was playing to the American Muslim audience, too, in a favorable way. But he will have to work with the governments. And I think what he was signaling is that, well, first of all, it was his first interview, which is terribly symbolic. Second, you have to think of this, too, in the context of just having appointed George Mitchell to be the special envoy to the Middle East. So they're hitting the ground running, avoiding sort of all these confirmation hearings and all that you would have to get a whole team in place. George Mitchell's already there. So he's hitting it from all angles, and he's doing it at an opportune time, having just come into office. There's this sort of interregnum in a period where Israel is just before an election, and Gaza is over. So it's very symbolic, but it's also a very strong assault, really, on this issue, which when the time that progress has been made in the Middle East, which is, it's a very difficult issue, but it's always, it seems to be when some very bold step is taken by, I mean, I'm thinking here of Anwar Sadat, for example, and who knows?
If you look at both Clinton and Bush began to address this issue in their final year.
Right, right.
And I think what he's saying is, we're doing it differently this time. And we're starting right at the beginning. And again, politically, there's very little, if anything, for him to gain in this. I think he's just trying to do the right thing, because until we deal with that issue,
right,
the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the rest of the pieces are not going to fall in place.
John, you're a public diplomacy practitioner, so how would you score this on the public diplomacy side?
Well, first of all, it's not the first time a president has spoken or high government officials have talked to foreign audiences. For the last 20 years, we've had a vehicle for addressing audiences around the world, and I had the pleasure of doing some of that in some of the countries where I served. So the medium is not startling. The fact that he chose as his first address to talk to the Middle East. But let's not get too far out ahead of ourselves on this. I mean, he didn't say anything that was concrete in terms of how this was all going to evolve. Appointing George Mitchell as his special envoy there is very good. He could have put Holbrooke there, and that could have been another set of problems.
Now, why do you think it's problematic for Holbrooke?
There isn't enough ego in the middle, room for his ego in the Middle East.
I totally agree with that.
But it was a very, I mean, he is a fine communicator. He may even be a great communicator. And that can be very helpful in terms of your foreign policy. But let's also remember that it may have been George Bush who was the president when we were siding with Israel on many of these cases, but it was both sides of the political spectrum, the Democrats and the Republicans, the left and the right, that have been lockstep behind Israel in support of Israel. And so if he is going to attempt to try to get more balance, and I think that's a great idea, that he is going to have to find out a way in which to move this through his legislature.
Is the reviews in the Arab press were sort of glowing, and they appreciated the communication aspect of this, I guess, as you're saying, John. What happens now at sort of the policy level? I mean, how do they follow up on that kind of a speech? Yes, Mitchell was appointed. That's a big piece of it.
Mitchell goes to the region. Mitchell carries his message. Mitchell listens as opposed to tells, and Mitchell is a good person for doing that. And that's why he's the right envoy for that region, in my mind.
I totally agree he's the right envoy. I think what you wanted from President Obama is exactly what you got. Very general, very non-controversial, very supportive, and that's when Mitchell goes in. And Mitchell goes in with the details. And the other thing is that Mitchell was Senate Majority Leader. So this idea of when it gets finished and it has to get into, it's not going to hurt to have George Mitchell being the one.
No question.
Shepherding that.
I want to, speaking of shepherding.
Shepherding that?
Shepherding.
Oh, my.
Favorite term of yours, Louis?
Do we have the shepherd cups here? No.
I want to move us to our second issue and talk about the exchange between President Obama and the Russians about this openness, again, an openness to sort of consider new policy options, and the move by the Russians to delay the installment of these Iskandar missiles near the border with Poland. And again, John, you spent some time in Moscow and following this relationship. How do you see what's happening? How do you read the sort of events here?
I don't think it's accidental that the Russians decided not to deploy. As they said, they hadn't deployed them, so this wasn't really an issue. But we have been going through a quid pro quo since Kosovo. Actually, we go back before that, but just start with Kosovo. We told the Russians their position on Kosovo was irrelevant, and they came back and said, your position on Georgia is irrelevant. And so we've been going through that kind of a thing. With the change in administration, there's always the opportunity to change the level of rhetoric and the type of rhetoric. You can toughen it, you can ease off, but it's a chance for a change. Russia just taught Europe and the Ukraine a little lesson over natural gas. With the economic downturn, the assault on the ruble, the fact that they have this recent success, they may decide that this is a good time to pull back.
They've already launched one offensive now.
This is a good time to find out where this administration is going and how we can. There are major issues that we need to discuss with the Russians. The issue of the terrorism, anti-drugs smuggling, human trafficking. There's a whole range of issues that we have that are very important to work out with the Russians. It's not accidental that Petraeus went through the stands looking for ways in which to change the transportation, Central Asian republics, to change the supply route into Afghanistan. And right after he went through, who goes through there but Medvedev, the president of Russia, to tell the people who are there, you don't make any deals without working this out with us first.
And in terms of the strategic priority here, so we have Arab world, Russia. Do you read anything of that? Has Russia gained more importance in the U.S. foreign policy?
No, I think that what's happening is that both sides are feeling each other out, really, to see where this is going to go. And both sides need each other right now. And we particularly don't want to be involved in a difficult relationship with Russia, or we want to make it less difficult, I should say. It just is similar to the situation in China, because we have other issues that we have to spend our time with. And we do have the START 1 treaty that needs to be, that expires in December. And there's a lot of work that could be done with Russia on the whole issue of nuclear weapons. And
so in addition to the issues,
I left that one out.
Right. It's really
clearly
important.
an important one on liberation.
I think, again, going back to President Obama is trying to right the ship a little bit. And
right in a right-left perspective here, Louis, or you mean correct?
Center, he's put it that way. He needs to get centered.
Changing course.
Needs to become centered. Condoleezza Rice, her doctorate degree and everything was in Soviet relations. The Soviet Union fell apart. She's still, at least what I observed over the years, she's locked in that mentality. That's kind of, you got to fight with Russia, you have to contain Russia, you have to whatever. And I think the Russians were absolutely appalled and shocked and everything when they started talking about putting this missile shield in Poland and Czech Republic. It was like, we're not your enemy anymore. What's going on here? And we're coming up with these. We're worried about Iranian missiles or whatever they were coming back with, and nobody believed that. And I think that the Russians are not ones that get easily pushed, so they came back with it. I think they couldn't be happier to drop this as long as we back off on this missile shield. And I think most of the sane foreign policy people in this country think we should be doing that also. And so I think that. Hopefully this will have a positive resolution.
You're just a few seconds before the break.
Also, Obama has not said that we're backing off. I mean, he's just sort of said he's going to review it, which is very non-committal, but allows for an opening.
Symbolic, but non-committal.
But it will have. I mean, he has.
There's more to it because they wouldn't have come out and said specifically. I just don't see the Russians making that kind of an advance move without some work.
We'll take our break, folks. Sorry to cut the conversation off. To our viewers, we'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup. We're talking with John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, and Louis Fortis. That's your name, right? You're new. I'm having trouble with your name, Louis. Well, we're going to switch sort of parts of the world again here, and I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's the rebel leader Laurent Nkunda, who had been accused of war crimes and leading a rebellion in the eastern part of Congo with the support of the Rwandan government, is captured by the Rwandans, taken to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, and now the Rwandan troops, with permission of the Congolese government, are in rooting out former Hutu militias that had prosecuted the genocide in Rwanda. So many years of history there in about 30 seconds. So this move has gotten received in two ways. One has been, hey, this is a huge step forward in peace, the Congolese government, the Rwandan government cooperating. Others are saying this is a huge disaster, or it's got huge potential for disaster for the local population. It's going to renew the fighting and so on. What's your reaction to what's going on there?
I think that on its face it looks like there's a lot of good in this, in that you've removed one war criminal, although we don't know what's going to happen to him. I mean, we really don't know what's going to happen to him. And you've gotten rid of one of the rebel groups that he was leading has now been integrated into the Congolese army. So now you're left really with one the Hutu group and to fight, and the Rwandans and the Congolese can fight this one group. But it's very problematic because the Rwandans have moved into the Congo, which is not the first time they've done it. They may have other motives in going in there. And the person who's leading the Congolese army now is another war criminal who a lot of observers are saying that, you know, the civilians in the area, they've already suffered tremendously and they're at considerable danger. There's no, in going after these Hutus, it's not such a great thing to have an indicted war criminal at the head of the military.
John, when you look at this, and in the context, say, of other processes where war criminals have been taken, or peace process, whether it's Liberia or Sierra Leone, wherever, do you see, you know, potential for good, potential for mischief, both?
I don't see potential for good. If you look at what this part of the Congo has to offer we wouldn't even be interested in this area if it weren't for two things. It's a safe haven for rebels, and also it's a very minerally rich area. And what you see is not just Rwanda, but Sudan, Angola, and Uganda, who have territorial interest or mineral access interests and trying to control pieces of that part of the country. That part of the country has almost no connection to Kinshasa. Kinshasa has very little influence. The capital of really what is the Congo.
Right. Far eastern, or far western side of the country.
Formerly Zaire, formerly Belgian Congo, formerly Belgian Free State, the Congo Free State.
Louis, this has been a huge humanitarian issue, the situation in eastern Congo. Jan Egeland, when he was at the UN, called it the greatest humanitarian disaster on the planet. Do these developments, you know, promise some relief?
Well, I think this is very positive, and I think Nkunda, it was a very charismatic, but just a vicious war criminal, to use your term. And I think with him out of the picture and being supported by Rwanda, because the other group, the Hutu group, does not have Rwandan support. Rwanda has a formidable military. They're a powerful country. And having them out of the picture or cooperating now, I think is only positive. You know, will that continue? We'll see. But if it does continue, I think that's great. I think the Congo is a huge country that is not well connected with internally, and I think and maybe there's less of a chance now that it'll end up getting broken up, and other countries will be, you know, grabbing parts of it because of the mineral wealth. I think in order to stabilize things, I think this is a positive step. We'll see what happens, but I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. So.
The reason I'm not optimistic is that I don't see anyone able to exercise any control. They have 17,000 UN peacekeepers in that particular region. We're talking about a country the size of Western Europe.
Right, and in this huge slaughter that took place last fall, the UN peacekeepers were a mile away. and thousands of people died, and I believe they were under the new chief of staff. Is that correct? Natanga, is that his name? The other war criminal.
Right. Well, and they're trying to add 3,100 more troops to this, and they have no idea where they're going to get them from and who's going to pay for them. So my pessimism is based on what the country is like, who could exercise any level of control.
Well, first of all, you took out somebody who was very charismatic, was a real leader. I mean, he could rally people behind him more than this current person. So I think
but who's holding him? Right. The people who were his patron are the ones who are holding him right now. And how do we know after they clean up, apparently there was an agreement, they would take him out, and then the Rwandans were able to go in after the rebels, the rebels who are opposing them. So they take care of those rebels or reduce them. So why can't he reappear again?
Because they'll probably end up in the International Criminal Court because they don't want to send him back to the Congo. They don't want to be holding him in Rwanda. I mean, neither thing is a very desirable thing. So that he'll end up maybe under the jurisdiction of the ICC, and that will I'm convinced he's out of the picture. Okay. And if he's out of the picture, as you mentioned, get rid of one war criminal, you have another one get in line. But I mean, it's still, you got rid of somebody who was the leader, was dynamic, charismatic, and vicious.
It's a very unhappy place in the world.
And extraordinarily wealthy in mineral wealth.
Last word, Ann?
I'm not very optimistic either.
Well, there's levels of optimism. I mean, it's not going to become Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I mean, it will. I think it'll be an improvement over what there is now.
So let's move to our last issue. Let's talk about China some. And so you had this statement by now Secretary Geithner saying most economists believe that China is deliberately manipulating its currency, a charge that the Bush administration's sort of made, and they've made some action on it, but one that is highly inflammatory toward the Chinese. On the other hand, this wasn't necessarily in a speech given in front of the Council on Foreign Relations or something. So, Louis, do you see this as a tempest in a teapot that's going to blow over, or is this really a sign of a different approach on the part of the administration?
I think he even went further. I think he said President Obama now is convinced from listening to all these economists that it's overvalued. It probably it is undervalued, and I mean it's been undervalued for a long, long time. But we have this very cozy relationship, right? We buy all the product from them. They take the money back and take the money and loan it back to us, so it keeps the exchange rates fairly stable, and we're able to continue to borrow money right and left at a very reasonable rate because China is willing to provide the money. If China pulled back and started, instead of buying only U.S. dollar denominated bonds and started buying euro, we'd be in big trouble. Our interest rates would go up. We'd have trouble, some trouble financing our debt. So right now it's kind of a cozy relationship. You know, it's kind of, I think, just a little slap and nothing more than that. I don't think this is the beginning of any serious.
And is this likely to have been just sort of an oversight in a written testimony, or is it a little bit of a intentional poke?
I think it's a mistake that they made. I think everybody talks about Secretary Geithner's, expertise in Asia and his previous positions, but his expertise is in economics, and this is a political issue. And I kept wondering, why did he say this? What was his motive? Some people said, well, maybe it was to appease, to speak to the trade unions and, public, domestic audience. But I think that it wasn't a good thing to say. We got a lot of flack, particularly with the meeting going on in Davos, Switzerland, with all these, economic heavyweights there. And I think that it was something that they probably already regret. We were talking earlier and saying there hasn't really been much follow-up on this. And I think that even though it was in a statement, the Chinese look for this stuff, and they're really looking for any sign of China bashing. And so it was pretty inflammatory.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, the eyebrows went up but the dollar went down. So did the stock market.
Yeah.
I think it just takes out of context a much more complex relationship, and one in which we need to be not picking on details or making rhetorical.
And I think China, to this one of the responses was this might compromise the reaction to the global financial crisis, which I guess was a bit of a poke back.
Were there any efforts to try to, I didn't at least see or read any efforts to try to say, well, this isn't really what they meant. I didn't see anything. I didn't see. So it leads me to believe that there was some thought put in that comment, and I don't think it was a smart thing to do. I don't understand what the benefit was, which explains why you think it was a mistake. But I also don't see them in any way trying to backtrack, say, whoa, that's not what he really said or what he really meant. Or, you know,
this would be a case where I would get up and say what the ambassador meant to say was.
Exactly.
Especially since 3 years ago they depegged the dollar and the yuan, and there has been a 20%.
20%, yes, adjustment.
Unfortunately, we can keep going like this, but we can't because they're going to make us stop. So again, I want to thank you, John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, Louis Fortis, for joining us on our World Affairs Roundup. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.